Benjamin woke to the soft golden light of dawn filtering through the leaves of his small tent. The air was crisp, and the distant chirping of birds brought a strange sense of comfort. He sat up, stretching his thin arms and rubbing his eyes. As he stepped out of the tent, he noticed the plate from the night before still sitting on the flat rock. It was clean, not a grain of rice left behind. "Thank you, Mama," he whispered again, placing his hand gently on the grave as if she could feel his gratitude. The cemetery was peaceful in the morning light, but Benjamin knew he needed to get ready for school. He picked up the few belongings he had, a worn notebook and a pencil stub, and began his walk to the school, his bare feet crunching softly against the dirt path. As he approached the school, he noticed a group of students gathered near the gate. Their chatter quieted as they saw him, and a few whispered among themselves. "That's the boy who lives in the cemetery," one of them muttered. Benjamin kept his head down, ignoring their words. He was used to it by now. The only thing that mattered to him was his education. He walked into the classroom and took his seat at the back, his small frame blending into the shadows of the room. Miss Grace entered the class shortly after, her warm smile lighting up the room. She glanced at Benjamin and gave him a small nod, as if to say, "I see you, and I'm here for you." The lessons began, and Benjamin focused intently, absorbing every word. Education was his hope, his escape from the hardships of life. He scribbled notes diligently, his handwriting shaky but determined. During the break, a group of older boys approached him. They weren't teasing or mocking him this time. Instead, one of them, a tall boy named Daniel, handed him a small package wrapped in brown paper. "I heard you don't have lunch," Daniel said awkwardly, scratching the back of his head. "Here. It's just some bread and a mango." Benjamin hesitated for a moment, his pride urging him to refuse, but the gnawing hunger in his stomach made him reach out. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice barely audible. Daniel nodded and walked away, leaving Benjamin to eat in peace. As he bit into the soft bread, he felt a warmth spread through him, not just from the food, but from the kindness of a stranger. After school, Benjamin made his way back to the cemetery. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. As he neared his mother's grave, he noticed something unusual. A small pile of firewood and a bundle of blankets had been placed near his tent. His heart skipped a beat. Who could have left this? He looked around, but the graveyard was empty, just as it always was. The firewood was neatly stacked, and the blankets were clean and folded. "Thank you, Mama," he whispered again, though a part of him wondered if someone else was watching over him. That night, he built a small fire beside the tent, its warmth chasing away the chill of the night. Wrapped in the blankets, he felt more secure than he had in days. The next morning, Benjamin arrived at school to find Miss Grace waiting for him. She had a new book in her hands, its cover bright and colorful. "Benjamin," she said, kneeling down to his level, "I found this book in the library. I thought you might like it." She handed him the book, and his eyes lit up as he read the title, "The Boy Who Dreamed of the Stars." "Thank you, Mom," he said, his voice filled with genuine gratitude. Miss Grace smiled. "You're welcome. Keep dreaming, Benjamin. You're capable of great things." As the weeks passed, Benjamin settled into a routine. He attended school during the day, worked hard on his studies, and returned to the cemetery in the evenings. His small tent became a home of sorts, and the graveyard, with its quiet stillness, gave him a sense of peace that no other place could. But the whispers in the village didn't stop. People talked about the boy who lived among the dead, some calling him brave, others calling him strange. Aunt Kim, humiliated by her encounter at the cemetery, tried to avoid the topic altogether, though her anger simmered beneath the surface. One evening, as Benjamin sat by the fire, a soft voice broke the silence. "Benjamin." He turned quickly, his heart pounding. Standing a few feet away was a woman, her figure bathed in the soft glow of the firelight. She was old, with kind eyes and a shawl draped over her shoulders. "Who are you?" Benjamin asked, his voice trembling slightly. The woman smiled. My name is Nana Efra. I used to know your mother. Benjamin's eyes widened. You knew my mama? Yes, Nana Efra said, sitting down beside him. She was a kind woman, always helping others. She loved you very much. Benjamin's throat tightened. I miss her, he whispered. I know, Nana Efra said gently. She would be so proud of you, Benjamin. Living here, staying strong, going to school. You're a brave boy. For the first time in a long while, Benjamin felt a lump rise in his throat. He blinked back tears, nodding silently. Nana Efra reached into her bag and pulled out a small pouch. Your mother used to make this tea, she said, handing it to him. It'll help you sleep better. Benjamin took the pouch, his hands trembling. Thank you, he said. Nana Efra stayed for a while, sharing stories about his mother, how she used to laugh, the songs she used to sing, the dreams she had for Benjamin's future. As the fire died down, Nana Efra stood and placed a hand on his shoulder. Remember, you're never alone, she said. Your mother's love is always with you. As she walked away, disappearing into the darkness, Benjamin felt a strange sense of peace wash over him. He looked up at the stars, twinkling brightly above, and whispered, Thank you, Mama. Thank you for sending her. The days turned into weeks, and Benjamin's life settled into a quiet routine. Each morning, he woke to the first rays of sunlight filtering through his makeshift tent. He would tidy up the small area around his mother's grave, carefully brushing away leaves and debris, and speak to her softly as if she could hear him. Mama, I'll do my best today, he whispered one morning, looking at her grave with determination. I'll make you proud. At school, Benjamin became known for his sharp mind and quiet determination. Despite his ragged clothes and bare feet, his teachers admired his focus and perseverance. Miss Grace, in particular, made it her mission to help him. She often brought him extra food, gave him books to read, and even stayed after class to help him catch up on the lessons he had missed. One day, Miss Grace pulled him aside after school. Benjamin, she began gently, you're one of the brightest students I've ever taught. But I can't help worrying about you. Living in the cemetery, it's not safe for a child. Benjamin looked down at his feet, unsure of how to respond. Please, she continued, let me help you find a better place to stay. You deserve a real home. Benjamin hesitated before answering. Thank you, Mom, but I'm fine where I am. The cemetery, it's where I feel closest to my mother. I don't want to leave her. Miss Grace sighed, her heart aching for the boy. She didn't press him further but resolved to keep looking out for him in any way she could. That evening, as Benjamin walked back to the cemetery, he noticed a small crowd gathered near the village square. Curious, he approached cautiously, staying on the edges of the group. Have you heard? One woman whispered to another. The chief is organizing a scholarship program for students who can't afford school fees. Benjamin's heart skipped a beat. A scholarship. Could this be his chance to secure a better future? He listened intently as the village chief, a tall man with a booming voice, addressed the crowd. We believe that every child deserves an education, the chief said. Starting next month, we will hold an exam. The top-performing students will receive full scholarships, including books, uniforms, and meals. Benjamin clenched his fist, determination surging through him. This was it. This was the opportunity he had been waiting for. That night, as he sat by his small fire, Benjamin opened the book Miss Grace had given him. He read by the flickering light, his lips moving silently as he sounded out the words. The story, about a boy who overcame great obstacles to reach for the stars, filled him with hope. I can do this, he whispered to himself. I'll work hard. I'll win that scholarship. The next day, he told Miss Grace about the scholarship program. Her eyes lit up with excitement. That's wonderful, Benjamin, she exclaimed. I'll help you prepare. We'll make sure you're ready for that exam. From that day on, Benjamin stayed late after school, studying with Miss Grace. She taught him math, science, and reading, patiently explaining things he didn't understand. The other students began to notice his determination, and some even offered to help. Daniel, the boy who had given him lunch, often sat with him during breaks, quizzing him on vocabulary words. "You're really smart, Benjamin," Daniel said one day. "You're going to do great." Benjamin smiled shyly, his heart swelling with gratitude. As the exam date approached, Benjamin threw himself into his studies. He spent hours reading by the light of his fire, practicing math problems in the dirt, and memorizing facts from borrowed textbooks. But life wasn't without challenges. Aunt Kim hadn't given up on trying to bring him back. She showed up at the school several more times, yelling and demanding that he return home. Each time, the teachers and students stood up for Benjamin, refusing to let her take him. "He deserves a chance," Miss Grace told her family. "You've had your chance to care for him, and you failed. Let him be." Aunt Kim eventually stopped coming, though Benjamin knew she was still bitter. He tried not to think about her, focusing instead on his goal. The day of the exam finally arrived. Benjamin woke early, his stomach twisting with nerves. He put on the cleanest shirt he owned and walked to the school, clutching his pencil tightly in his hand. The exam room was silent as the students took their seats. Benjamin felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him, but he took a deep breath and reminded himself of why he was doing this. For Mama. The exam was long and difficult, but Benjamin gave it everything he had. He wrote carefully, double-checking his answers and refusing to let doubt creep in. When the final bell rang, he put down his pencil and sighed with relief. "It's done," he thought. "Now I wait." The weeks that followed were agonizing. Benjamin continued his routine, but the anticipation of the exam result was always at the back of his mind. Finally, the day came. The village chief called an assembly at the school to announce the scholarship winners. Benjamin stood at the back of the crowd, his heart pounding. The top scholarship, the chief announced, goes to a student who has shown exceptional determination and intelligence. Benjamin. The crowd erupted in applause, and Benjamin felt tears streaming down his face. He stepped forward slowly, his legs trembling. "You've earned this," the chief said, handing him a certificate. "Keep working hard, young man. Your future is bright." Miss Grace was waiting for him as he left the stage. She pulled him into a tight hug, her eyes shining with pride. "I knew you could do it," she said. That evening, as Benjamin returned to the cemetery, he knelt by his mother's grave and placed the certificate on the mound of earth. "I did it, Mama," he whispered. "I'm going to make you proud." The wind rustled the leaves gently, as if in response. For the first time, Benjamin felt like he wasn't just surviving, he was truly living, and his dreams were finally within reach. The scholarship brought Benjamin a new sense of purpose, but it also drew attention, some good, some bad. The village buzzed with stories about the boy who had defied all odds. Some praised his determination, while others whispered behind his back, questioning how an orphan living in a cemetery could have achieved so much. Benjamin tried to ignore the whispers, focusing instead on his studies. The scholarship provided him with new uniforms, books, and meals at school, but it didn't change his living situation. He still returned to the cemetery each evening, where he felt closest to his mother. But something began to change. One night, as Benjamin sat by his small fire reading, he heard a faint rustling in the bushes nearby. He froze, his heart pounding. The cemetery was usually quiet at night, save for the distant chirping of crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl. Slowly, he turned his head toward the sound. "Is someone there?" he called out, his voice steady despite the fear creeping up his spine. Silence. He stood up cautiously, his eyes scanning the darkness. The firelight flickered, casting eerie shadows on the gravestones. He took a step forward, his bare feet crunching softly on the dry leaves. Then he saw it, a small figure darting between the graves. "Hey! Stop!" Benjamin shouted, running after it. The figure was fast, weaving through the tombstones with ease. Benjamin's breath came in short gasps as he chased it, his mind racing. Was it a thief? A stray animal? Or something else? Finally, the figure stopped near an old, crumbling mausoleum at the edge of the cemetery. Benjamin slowed down, his chest heaving. "Who are you?" he demanded. "Why are you here?" The figure stepped into the moonlight, revealing a boy around Benjamin's age. His clothes were tattered, and his face was smeared with dirt. I'm sorry," the boy stammered. "I didn't mean to scare you. Why were you following me?" Benjamin asked, his voice firm but not unkind. "I wasn't," the boy replied quickly. "I live here too. I've seen you before, but I didn't know how to talk to you." Benjamin stared at him, unsure of what to say. "Another child living in the cemetery." "What's your name?" he finally asked. "Samuel," the boy said, looking down at his feet. "Why are you here, Samuel?" The boy hesitated before answering. "My parents, they're gone. I don't have anywhere else to go." Benjamin felt a pang of sympathy. He knew that kind of loneliness all too well. "You can stay near me if you want," he said softly. "It's safer together." Samuel's eyes lit up with gratitude. "Thank you." As the days turned into weeks, Samuel and Benjamin became fast friends. They shared what little food they could find, helped each other with schoolwork, and kept watch over each other at night. Samuel, it turned out, was clever and resourceful. He showed Benjamin how to reinforce his tent, find edible plants, and even set small traps for animals. But strange things continued to happen in the cemetery. One night, as they sat by the fire, Samuel suddenly went quiet, his eyes fixed on something in the distance. "What is it?" Benjamin asked, following his gaze. "Over there," Samuel whispered, pointing toward a cluster of graves. Benjamin squinted into the darkness. At first, he saw nothing. Then, slowly, a faint light appeared, hovering above one of the graves. It flickered like a candle flame, but there was no wind to carry it. "What is that?" Benjamin whispered, his voice barely audible. "I don't know," Samuel replied, his voice trembling. "But I've seen it before. It comes and goes." The two boys watched in silence as the light moved, drifting lazily between the gravestones. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished. Benjamin and Samuel exchanged uneasy glances. "We should go back to the tent," Samuel said, his voice tight with fear. Benjamin nodded, but as they turned to leave, a low, mournful sound echoed through the cemetery. It was faint, almost like a whisper carried on the wind. "Did you hear that?" Benjamin asked, his heart pounding. Samuel nodded, his face pale. The sound grew louder, more distinct, a voice, crying softly. "Help me." The boys froze, their eyes wide with terror. The voice seemed to be coming from the direction of Benjamin's mother's grave. "We have to check," Benjamin said, his voice shaking but resolute. "Are you crazy?" Samuel hissed. "What if it's something bad?" Benjamin shook his head. "I have to. It's my mother." They approached the grave cautiously, their footsteps slow and deliberate. The voice grew fainter, then stopped altogether as they reached the grave. The air was still, heavy with an unnatural silence. Benjamin knelt by the grave, his hands trembling. "Mama," he whispered. There was no response. Samuel placed a hand on his shoulder. "Maybe we should leave. This doesn't feel right." Before Benjamin could reply, a sudden gust of wind swept through the cemetery, extinguishing their fire. The boys cried out in alarm, clinging to each other as the darkness closed in around them. Then, out of the silence, came a sound, a faint tapping, like someone knocking gently on wood. Benjamin's heart stopped. He knew that sound. It was coming from beneath the earth. The tapping grew louder, more insistent. Benjamin stood, his legs shaking, and placed a hand on the headstone. "Mama," he whispered again, his voice barely audible. The tapping stopped. Then, slowly, the ground beneath the grave began to shift. "Run!" Samuel shouted, grabbing Benjamin's arm and pulling him away. But Benjamin didn't move. He was rooted to the spot, his eyes fixed on the grave. Benjamin! Samoa shouted again, desperation in his voice. The ground stilled, and for a moment, everything was silent. Then, a faint glow began to emanate from the grave, illuminating Benjamin's face in the pale light. "I'm not afraid," he said softly, more to himself than to Samoa. The glow faded, and the grave returned to its normal state, as if nothing had happened. Samoa tugged at Benjamin's arm. "Let's go," he pleaded. "Please." Reluctantly, Benjamin allowed himself to be led back to the tent. But as he lay awake that night, staring up at the stars, he couldn't shake the feeling that his mother was trying to tell him something. Something important. Wait for next part and also subscribe.